their careers, we know that supervisors can change assignment. And if we do not have a very systematic, robust way through data of tracking that, no matter where the trajectory of that employee goes or that supervisor, we're going to have problems and we're not going to see it. I know that there have been questions raised about when an incident occurs, well, Chief Rondo, how come you didn't know about this person's number of complaints and what have you? We need to reevaluate that. We need to do it with real-time data. We as an organization need to evolve and use technology to our advantage. And by the way, it doesn't have to wait for every 30 days for an employee review or every year. We are able to do this now with real-time data. So I'm very excited about that being introduced into our organization.
We'll open it up now to 12 representatives, please.
Chief, you had previously said that in your view, the three other officers besides Chauvin that were involved in this case were complicit in George Floyd's death. Attorneys for at least two of the other officers have said that they were rookie cops and that they were following Chauvin's lead. What's your response to that?
The policies that I put out for our department, those policies are not guided in years of service. I don't put policies out to say that you should only react or respond if you're a 2-year member or a 5-year member or a 10-year member. And if policies or subculture get in the way, then I expect and I demand one's humanity to rise above that. And so that is my answer for that.
Please.
About those rookie cops, they were just a few shifts into the job. The only thing they really had to rely on is their training. Does it show that the training here is failing?
What I observed, and I want to be very just mindful that obviously this case is under investigation, but what I observed was not training that I ever participated in, none that I observed other officers participating in. And so, again, I will go back to when I helped craft the duty to intervene and duty to report back in 2016. It does not signify if you have 2 days on or 20 years on. We expect you to, whether it's verbally or physically, to call up for help and to intervene. Mr. Floyd, at the very least, was expecting that.
To follow up on that, is being a rookie cop an excuse for what happened here? That's what they're saying. And number two, do you think these two changes are really going to be enough to make the sweeping changes at the department that people are looking for?
When our members put on this badge, our communities should not expect any service or treatment different because you're 2 days on or 20 years on. We expect you to serve in a manner that is providing our communities with respect, dignity, giving them voice, and having neutral engagements. That's universal. And so our community should expect us to respond. I don't believe that during Mr. Floyd's encounter with the officers that he knew what years of service those employees, former employees, had on, but he was expecting humanity that day, and it was not.
To make the sweeping reform that people are looking for right now, the two changes you announced today?
Oh, there will be many more. These are just two that I'm highlighting today. But we will really be doing a deep dive. But I also want to just say this again. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been approached personally, emails and phone calls from wide-ranging members of our police department, both sport and civilian, and they have unequivocally said, Chief, that's not us. That is not who we are. And they are committed to making sure they go back out there and they're in their communities and they're trying to rebuild that trust. And so it's going to be a heavy lift. It's going to be some hard work. But I'm determined that we are going to be on the right side of history.
Quick question. I just wanted to kind of follow up on the training before we get too far away from that. A family of David Smith has spoken out in recent days, 10 years ago, in a very appeared to be a similar case of the local YMCA. Yes. He was pinned by ballet to the ground and ended up dying. The city paid out $3 million. The family, I guess, as part of this lawsuit, had also been sort of promised some changes, at least in terms of training. Do you see a parallel between the two cases, and are these officers being trained on how to restrain a suspect?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So again, the current incident involving Mr. Floyd, that is being under thorough review from both a state and federal level, and we certainly would do an examination of that. But again, our training is key in this, and there was nothing in that training that should have resulted, in my opinion, that occurred with Mr. Floyd. But in terms of Mr. Smith's family, we will obviously look at our training and continue to look at it. And you mentioned asphyxial positioning and what have you. So, yeah.
Okay. Chief, you say you've got internal support for this, but we saw on Facebook some potentially inflammatory comments. You know, society seems to have turned a corner on this. Is MPD doing it? I mean, it doesn't look like at least some of the people are getting the message.
And I'm familiar with what you're referencing. When I came into my role back in 2017 in our vision statement, I specifically talked about social media and that you do not get a pass as a Minneapolis police employee being able to put this uniform on a Monday, but then Tuesday going home in the privacy of your home and putting out on social media things that you would not stand and do publicly in this uniform. I won't tolerate that. I won't tolerate that.
What does it say about, I mean, do people have reason to doubt the sincerity of this department when things like that are showing up online?
Absolutely. And we are going to be judged by every singular action. Absolutely. And so that is why it is even more indicative and more paramount that we understand that, and by the way, not only are we going to be judged by a singular incident that occurs within our organization, but we have the enormous responsibility of accountability to the other police agencies across this country who are going to be impacted by an officer's actions. So absolutely, our community has every right to question our other employees getting the message. And it's up to me to make sure that they're getting that message loud and clear of what we will and will not tolerate.
Charlie.
Chief, now that you've had a couple of weeks to look at the incidents that occurred in the wake of what happened to Mr. Floyd, do you have any better sense of who were the real troublemakers? There's been a lot of conversation about people coming in from out of town. Do you think that what occurred here was organic, or do you think it was manipulated?
That's a good question. So I know that early on there was information that potentially there were other outside influencers that had arrived in our city during the protests and the riots and what have you. I believe some of that to still be true in terms of the percentage or the amount of how many were from out of state. They're still looking at that. But I will just say this here. We had never experienced what we experienced 2 weeks ago in the city. Never. I believe that Governor Walz has indicated that it was the largest call out of the National Guard in our state's history. There were many things that occurred, and I'm a product of Minneapolis. When I drive down Lake Street or Broadway Avenue, my heart hurts. We have not seen that ever before. And so, regardless if those individuals from out of state or here, people were in pain, we also harmed our community as well. And I have to make sure that we never go down that road again. So.
Okay, please.
Chief,
Yes, ma'am.
can you take us through that night bouncing off of him? It quite frankly was a mess down there outside the 3rd precinct, and I think people would like to hear from your perspective, not politicians, not any journalists, not anyone else, but your decision, the things that were going through your mind when you say the 3rd precinct goes. We are not going to surround that and engage. We're not going to do that. Many people have asked, was that the right decision? Can you tell us from a chief's perspective, how did you arrive at that decision? Who else influenced you in making that, or was it you, and do you still stand by it?
Yes, it's a good question. It would probably require a lot more time today to go into all of those details, but I will tell all of you that the night that you're talking about, that was something that we had not seen. I had never seen in my course of my 30 plus years with this organization. We had multiple high-risk civil unrest incidents occurring in our entire city all at once. The 3rd precinct had some protesters who had breached the gates. At the same time, we had local businesses, Target for one, that was overrun by looters. We had liquor stores adjacent from the precinct that was overrun by looters. Molotov cocktails were being made. We had an AutoZone tire store that was being looted, burning. We had multiple calls of shots being fired in the area. When the fire started, fire needed police escorts to get in. And I had men and women within that building who, for practical sense, they were surrounded. And if individuals had got inside and they were outnumbered, the individuals, the officers in there would have been outnumbered, there's only a couple of ways that scenario would have ended. And none of them would have been good. None of them would have been good. I did not want to see community members severely injured or worse, and I certainly didn't want to see the men and women who wear this uniform injured or worse. So I obviously had been communicating real time the dynamics on the ground that evening with the mayor, and at one point in time he gave me the directive that we were going to evacuate, and then I made the call for our teams to get the transport vehicles in there, get our folks out of there.
In other words, retreat. Pick and choose your war. You know, whenever you're outweighed and you don't stand a snowball chance, and you know what?
Continue to reflect on that. There will be after action reports on that.
Towards winning in this controversial subject or controversial scenario that you're playing out in, and because of it, you retreat. You try to take the lesser of the two evils, and you already know that there's going to be real estate damage. There's going to be real estate damage. What you don't want is to have life damage.
Negotiations starting now. Can you kind of paint a picture for people of the obstacle that's there and how these changes could help break down that obstacle?
So contracts obviously have been in place, and I want to say that I absolutely support the work of unions in terms of what they're designed to do to help better work environments and workplaces for employees. But policing is very significant. We are obviously one of the few occupations that have the ability to deprive someone of their freedom, have arrest powers, and can legally and justifiably take life. So our communities are absolutely concerned about how those contracts are designed and the impacts that they have on them. As a chief, as I mentioned earlier, it's important for me to make sure that everyone is adhering to our policies. There is a character about this department that we should be aligning ourselves to. If there are impediments in the way of union contracts, that absolutely makes it difficult. When I have to go before community members and explain why an employee who I believe should not be wearing this badge is working back in their communities, that's very problematic for me. That also can erode trust. And so I need to, as chief, step away from the table with the Minneapolis Police Federation and really take a deep dive in terms of how we can do something that has historically been something that has been in the way of progress that I've been hearing from many within our city. And so that is my intention moving forward.
Would you say, Chief, it's that union contract that's kind of preventing you from actually managing your department? That contract is standing in the way of you making sure that all officers are on the up and up and we don't have an incident like we had here a couple weeks ago?
I think that it's very clear that we have to evolve. I think that the traditional process in terms of the union contract are probably antiquated and are not meeting the needs of all vested stakeholders. And as chief, I think now is the time to step away from that and start anew. Yeah.
One other question about what started all of this, and I think again this is to clear up what has become a national conversation about that $20 bill. What can you tell us now about Cup Foods, what Mr. Floyd was doing, and the call that brought your officers to him, and then we saw the rest. Is there anything new or anything that you could go over detail-wise from your perspective that would shed more light on that so that people have facts and can stop with their personal opinions, which may not be true?
So I will just say this here. I haven't delved so much into the call specifics with the counterfeit bill and the original reason why our police responded. I do know that there was relationship to perhaps a counterfeit bill, but I want to be very clear. There is nothing within that call that should have resulted in the outcome that occurred with Mr. Floyd. I want to be very clear. There is nothing in that call that should have resulted in the outcome of Mr. Floyd's death. But we will be looking at all of these things during after-action reports and what have you, but I appreciate the question.
Oh, sure. That's all right. You have said that being silent is complicit. In the short time that I've been back here, I've heard from a lot of people who say the 3rd precinct is a bad precinct, a lot of bullies, a lot of bad cops. Chauvin was one of the good ones, someone told us. So if being silent is being complicit, if you knew there were problems there, why didn't you fix them?
So that's a good question. So I've only worked the 3rd precinct perhaps a couple of months in my 31-year career, and so I've been throughout the organization. Yeah, and so culture is one in which it can be very unwieldy, but you have to continue to stay on it. I don't believe that every single officer that wears this uniform would have done the things that occurred that evening 2 weeks ago. I have to continue to look at the different parts of this organization that could foster negative culture, that could foster negative reactions or relationships with our community. And so, I will continue to do that. But I will say more than that. It is imperative for me to make sure that I have leadership within this organization. I can dole out policies to live long day, but that supervisor at night who is standing before that roll call with he or she's officers, that's who they're going to really take their orders from. I have to ensure to make sure that we have the leadership that is trusted by me as chief, but more importantly, that is entrusted by our community, that they're going to be giving the right messages each and every day, so that we can break away from these subcultures of different things. Culture's not, obviously, types of subculture not different to Minneapolis Police Department or others. Yes.
Do you trust the commander of the 3rd precinct?
I have no reason not to trust the commander, the inspector of the 3rd precinct. Yes. Okay.
Any talk right now of body camera release from this, just to give the public outcry, just to see the entire episode from the body cameras of your officers who were involved in Floyd's arrest?
So right now, obviously, as the Minneapolis Police Department, this is being investigated by 2 separate agencies, so we do not have the purview of being able to do that. It would have to be a decision by those 2 different agencies.
So the VCA, I know in other cases the mayor has ordered them in the Blevins case, but right now you're saying the MPD has no control over the body camera footage.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah, you just have a bigger picture here. Can this department be reformed? And are you able personally to reform it?
Absolutely. And I think that we're going to have the community support in this. Our police department is going to be here, and we have to do better. And until the day that is not the case, we have to be committed each and every day. But as I said before, this is going to take time. It is going to take time. It's going to be a heavy lift, and it's going to be some hard work. But I do believe that we have the people, the men and women within this organization who are not going to let Mr. Floyd's death be in vain, who are not going to let the actions of a few tarnish what they've worked so hard for and continue to work so hard for. So I do believe in that.
Susan, please.
What role do you think the public has to play in holding police accountable for their actions? For example, this press release went out after his death that he had died of, a medical issue or what have you. And had there, I don't know your thoughts, had there not been a video that was posted by a citizen showing it, would we have known about this? Would this have been something that would have even gotten on our radar?
And that is truly what not only people here in Minneapolis have been questioning and talking about for a long time, but across this country. Are we acting truly in the best interest of our communities absent video? And it should never have to rely upon that. And so I'm thankful, absolutely, that this was captured in the manner that it was. No excuse for the actions. So, yes.
I want to weigh in on what they're talking about right here, because I've always wondered, in some citizens' lives, and I'm just going to use this for a quick example, some young girl that's trying to raise 2 children by herself because she's gotten involved in the wrong things in her life. She got involved with the wrong person in her life, and now she's out there struggling. Just for a police officer to pull somebody over like this and issue out a $160 ticket can be life-altering to a lot of people. It can literally be life-altering because she is already struggling towards feeding her children. The battery needs replacing on the car. The tires is basically bald. She should have replaced those a month ago. She's already behind in a couple months payment, and now all of a sudden she has to pay a $160 ticket because she didn't turn on her right blinker whenever she turned right. So you have to ask yourself the question, sometimes it's counterproductive in the benefit of the community towards how that the cops is steadily attacking their citizens the way that they're attacking their citizens. And I realize that laws are meant to not be broken. That's the whole purpose for creating the law. But it becomes counterproductive whenever the law itself is consuming the very citizens that it's supposed to be protecting and taking care of. Because now that same female is going to have to make compromises some more in her life towards not only not getting tires and taking a chance on the vehicle having a blowout going down the road and possibly killing her and the 2 children, but now she's going to have to make compromises towards not being able to feed the children. So where is that dividing line between the benefit of the community versus the benefit of safety? Because one thing can counterproduct to the other. And as far as your law enforcement agencies, these agencies, regardless whether it's state union, county union, federal union, or whatever, under the blue law, should be required by their law of letting us know who their bad employees are. Because some of them, like Captain Burns, that told me to quit demoting him the other day and told me to, if I'm going to use his name in any of my YouTube videos, for me to call him of his rank of what he is. So he is a captain. Captain Burns in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Explained to me that it was the unions and it was how that the unions protect under contract these particular bad actors in the police department. And there's no doubt, if you're in an Andy Griffith type town in the hills of the Smoky Mountains or up in North Carolina or up in eastern Tennessee or whatever, or even western Tennessee or whatever, you're not going to need such of a aggressive police force that knows about the chokeholds, that knows about all the pressure points in fighting, in dismantling people that are violent and hostile versus people that are working, let's say, in Charlotte, North Carolina, or Asheville, North Carolina, or people that working in Knoxville, or Nashville, or Memphis, or St. Louis, or Chicago, or New York. Because it is based on a case-by-case scenario, and it is based around the fact of geographically, where are these officers being placed at? And there are some officers that's probably in their late 40s, 50s, and 60s that really don't need to be working in a high crime area such as Chicago, St. Louis, Memphis, Nashville, Charlotte, North Carolina, or New York. Because of their age. Because of the type of people that they're having to address. Those are the type of police officers that need to be in your Andy Griffith type towns, to where they don't have near as much crime and near as much hostility. So where does the line get drawn between safety and being that officer that knows rather not he needs to go ahead and pursue this $160 ticket because this young female that's got these 2 kids that it's going to put strain on her even that much more worse? Where is the difference between the officer that puts out a warning ticket versus an actual ticket? Once more, we hire these police officers for the benefit and the safety of our communities, regardless whether it's city by city, town by town, or county by county, statewide or federal-wide. The whole thing is rotten to its core because of them trying to be shady, conniving, trying to work like there's some sort of secret society, kind of like the secret police that worked in the Nazism concentration camps over in Germany back during the risation of Nazism. And we need to conform our police departments, because the bottom line is this: 99.9% of the time, every time that I was embarked upon by being questioned about my motives towards where I was, what I was doing, how come I was doing what I was doing, towards putting out the information that I was putting out to the general public, in the span of 30 years, have always engaged in bad police officer ethics that began right down the road from where I live, 7 or 8 miles, in a little town called Kenton, Tennessee, with the mayor and a deputy by the name of Don Curry that uses the excuse of what went on that particular night, that he had not been on duty that long and he wasn't aware of the laws. Now, if you're that dim-witted to the point that you don't know the difference between somebody literally, not metaphorically, but literally attacking an individual with 64 staples that's holding their belly together, if you don't know the difference between taking care of a patient versus trying to destroy a patient or kill a patient, then obviously you probably don't need to be a deputy, and you for darn sure don't need to be a mayor of a town. Just like this mayor, yesterday I called Randy Brundridge looking for some sort of reply back, in which he never called. Even to this morning, I still haven't received any type of telephone call from Randy Brundridge. You know why? Because Randy Brundridge is not only guilty in the way that they physically attacked me in Central Baptist Church with calling up a bunch of police officers for no need and having me banded from the property for no reason, absolutely no reason whatsoever that they should have banded me from that church. But the way that the First Baptist Church in Martin banded me, and the way that the city police in Martin, Tennessee, attacked me in 2005 towards falsifying files. I see one imperfection of quality after another, leading all the way now to the point of what went on in 2017 after the death of my brother, in us being concerned about the welfare and the benefit of 3 children across the road, to the point that the judicial system turned it around to the point that if I didn't agree to a stalking charge, stalking these children across the road, or stalking this family across the road, I would probably still be in jail right now, debating with some sort of public defender of whether or not I'm going to get out or not get out. And in the meantime, these hoodlums and these thieves and these low-life, no-good-for-nothing neighbors, not all of them are bad neighbors, but most of them are bad neighbors, would have allowed for basically this property to been vandalized and basically pillaged from one end to the other by a bunch of drug addicts and a bunch of dope fiends. That's what would have went on in the eyes of the judicial system here in Weakley County. So yes, whenever it comes to the blue law, and whenever it comes to the unions protecting these bad actors that are involved in these police force academies and these agencies, something needs to be reformed. Because whenever you try to contact a mayor in regard towards what's going on and what has went on, and he refuses to talk to you, it's pretty obvious that the only way that you're going to get your message out is to do like basically what I'm doing right now, is by putting it out on YouTube. You put it out on YouTube and you let the whole world know that this is what has occurred in your life again and again and again, regardless whether it was the Kentucky authorities pertaining to land between the lakes, pertaining to the Hawkins family and the Camry family, regardless whether it was land between the lakes administration in and of itself that reached out towards doing these unlawful things to a United States citizen, regardless whether it was the Oklahoma authorities that planted a bomb in the back end of my truck and blowed my truck up, me telling them the whole time that there was nothing in that vehicle that was harmful or deadly, and they went ahead and done it anyway, all the way down to what has occurred here in the state of Tennessee pertaining to these illegal, unethical methods or tactics that these police canopies or these police officers use in various towns or in various counties. So yes, it is rotten to the very core, pertaining to how they cover up and how they pick and choose towards who they're going to protect and who they're going to throw under the bus because somebody stepped on a wooden nickel. I understand and realize that the human characteristics of somebody holding grudges is something that everybody's going to have to deal with on one level or the other, regardless whether it be a lieutenant or a captain or a judge or a congressman or a governor or a president. I realize that the human characteristics of human beings is always going to have to be a objective that people are going to have to look through towards understanding. But whenever it is this massive in all the departments, in all the governments here in the United States, towards having over almost 2.5 million incarcerated people in jail, you don't have to be an Einstein to figure out there's something going on in America that shouldn't be going on whenever it comes to our judicial capital, not just capital, but our judicial justice systems. We have more people incarcerated in this country than any other country in the world. And whenever it comes to abuse, police abuse, it shouldn't be overlooked.
He is establishing something that I have been saying for the last several days. We need to come to the realization that we have a law enforcement system, a policing practices that come from two divergent set of experiences. A white community that's built from people who came into this country of their own free will, seeking freedom and justice, and a black set of experiences of people who came to this country against their will, chained, shackled, and enslaved. And this whole law enforcement judicial system has been built upon those two pillows. Now we now need to come to grips with that reality and say that it's time for us to restructure that.
And it's not just the black and white communities that he's talking about. It's those who have been in trouble before, who have paid their debt to society, but they want to live in that same society, but these cops refuses to let it go, and they're holding their feet to the fire towards holding old blood grudges or vendettas towards what has occurred. And whenever it comes to these type of unethical practices, they need to stop. And it's not just necessarily upon a white act versus a black act, but it's upon a rich act versus a poor act, because the poor people has poor ways, and of course the rich people has their own ways. And whenever you have a society that is running off of everything supposed to be hunky-dory, but it's not, and you're steadily picking on the poor society or the black society, this is what makes it very, very unfair or unjust. It's awful. It's absolutely awful, because they pick and choose towards who they're going to protect and who they're going to go after. And if you've ever made one boo-boo in your life, it's almost as if you will steadily be watched. You will have a magnifying glass on your life the rest of your life, and it's double jeopardy. You've not only paid your debt to society the first time by either fines or incarceration, but now you pay your debt again, because now you're under this spotlight. You're under this magnifying glass to the point that nobody's willing to give you an extra chance, and you're held under a light of suspicion the rest of your entire life because you made a mistake. And they call this justice? They call this fairness? We call it wrong.
And have reforms where we need them. We need the police. We want the police.
Right.
They have a role to play.
Right.
And so let's not get so carried away that we allow sloganeering to hijack this movement. That's what happened to us back in the 60s. John Lewis and I never struck any matches, never threw any rocks. But Burn, Baby Burn became the headline, and that's what people use as an excuse.
Right.
To reject any kind of, to resist any kind of change.
Right.
So I don't want us to allow sloganeering to cause people of goodwill to resist making the changes that we need to make. So yes, reallocate resources, reform policing, no to defund the police.
Congressman Jim Clyburn. Congressman, thank you. And next time I want to talk about voting in South Carolina and Georgia and all that went wrong there. We don't have time to talk about that today, but we'll do that next time. Thank you as always, sir. Do appreciate your time.
Look forward to it.
Really quickly, I want to bring it Kristen Clark, President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Zerlina Maxwell, Senior Director of Progressive Programming for SiriusXM. She worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign, now an MSNBC political analyst. Hey, Kristen, I want to start with you because the Minneapolis police chief said that he's withdrawing from these negotiations with the police union. I'm not sure folks fully appreciate how significant that is. What does it mean? How does that work?
This is incredibly significant, and I want to explain why. This is about accountability. It's about blowing the whole thing up and starting over, literally rebuilding a police department and reimagining the rules that are in place. new policies concerning use of force, new rules concerning when you discipline officers for misconduct and when you terminate officers who violate the rules. The reality is that in so many police departments across our country, policing reforms and the possibilities for change are literally constrained by contracts that are put in place by police unions, these collective bargaining agreements that are all about shielding officers. City of Philadelphia is a good example. That's a place where they've literally had to rehire 60% of police officers who were fired for misconduct because of police union rules. Camden actually did this back in 2012. They disbanded a police department that was riddled with corruption and a long history of abuse and built a new police department that was focused on community building. They got rid of all of the bad cops that had been in place, got rid of the police union, got rid of the collective bargaining agreement, and started from scratch. And that's what I heard the police chief in Minneapolis say today, that this is a moment that marks getting rid of the old system and all of its corruption and the stranglehold that that union had on that department, and let's start over. Let's start from scratch. Let's rebuild that police department from the ground up and give the community a say in how we reimagine policing in the city of Minneapolis. I think it is a great move and great announcement that we've heard from the police chief today.
Zerlina, we've heard a lot about police unions and the power that they wield over the past few days, both in Minneapolis, on the federal level as well. What power dynamics are at play here as our politicians grapple with some policy decisions pertaining to policing?
Well, certainly the unions historically have had a lot of power, but I think what we're looking at is in this moment is the coalescence of the activist-led part of this conversation, and that becoming an important and critical aspect of this movement and this moment. And I think looking forward, some of the answers this morning were very interesting, along with some of the follow-up questions. Why should police need to be trained? Why should anybody need to be trained not to put somebody in a chokehold for 8 minutes and 46 seconds until they are deceased? That shouldn't require any retraining or a new training program. That's simply respecting someone else's humanity. And if people are attracted to policing because of some of the dynamics that Kristen was talking about the protection of this violent brutality and specifically committed against Black bodies, then that is a system that perhaps needs to be substantially reimagined and completely dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up, as Kristen said, because you should not need to train someone to treat another person with the dignity and respect of a human being.
Exactly.
Zerlina Maxwell, we're going to have to leave it there. Zerlina, thank you. Kristen Clark, thank you. We did not have time to talk about the absolute disaster that was voting in Georgia yesterday, and not just Georgia, South Carolina experiencing problems as well. We didn't get to it, but I'm sure they will next hour. Andrew Mitchell Reports starts right now.
Wait, liquid.
You should not have to teach another person how to conduct themselves in respecting another person's dignity or another person's life. Just as the chief was talking about there in Minneapolis, there was nothing that individual had done that deemed that type of response coming from the law we're going to have to reform, and we're going to have to do it biblically if we're going to see true peace and utopia. Just as I have said before and I'll say again, whenever it says in the Bible to let the wheat grow with the tares, or let the tares grow with the wheat until time of harvest, the harvest was talking about the second coming of Christ, the rapture, it is mandatory, according to the Bible. Not a gesture, not a suggestion, but a recommendation for everybody to get along down here on the planet. And it doesn't matter if you're white, black, doesn't matter if you're educated, non-educated, doesn't matter if you're poor or rich, it doesn't matter if you're Afghanistan or Pakistan or Iran or Iranian, it doesn't matter if you're Jew or Gentile, Greek, or any of the above. We are to live in harmony upon to this planet if we expect to get the blessings from the Creator who created all of us. In other words, we're supposed to integrate and do so in a positive performance to where it is beneficial for all parties. Not just one group, but all parties. And the police are supposed to be there, and our courts is supposed to be there for the bad actors. But whenever you have the bad actors that's part of the police, then you have a recipe of what you're dealing with right now towards the blind leading the blind and the blind leading off into the ditch. So yes, the system needs to be conformed. The system is rotten to the core. The system needs to be looked at in identifying various bad actors that shouldn't be protected under no type of blue law, shouldn't be protected under the guidance of the union, but they should be brought out at least to the various precincts that has them in their possession and be disciplined the way that they're supposed to be disciplined. Because, you know, if you're a thief and you're working for the police department, odds are you probably shouldn't be working for the police department. If you're a drug dealer and you're working for the police department, odds are you shouldn't be working for the police department. If you have a problem pertaining to sexual arousement and you're a pedophile yourself, you really don't have no business working for the police department. The Bible's very clear towards getting the mote out of your own eye before you worry about getting the beam out of somebody else's eye. And whenever you have a police department that is just as corrupt as the corrupt, then is whenever you have the blind leading the blind, and they both shall lead it off into the ditch. This should have been addressed in the 60s properly. Whenever the risation of the disturbances that was going on during the civil rights movement, this should have been addressed 40-something years ago, but never did come to a true head. And the reason why it never did come to a true head was because there was too many white players involved that had the money, the backing. And we're just not talking about people associated in politics necessarily, but we're talking about your backers. We're talking about your partners. We're talking about your congregations that go to these big fancy churches, that drive their big fancy cars and live in their big fancy houses. These are the people that never did truly conform in understanding that Lincoln's proclamation that all is equal should be looked upon in the same form, regardless of what color that you are. Now, there's no doubt that there's certain areas and certain, on a case-by-case basis, and there are certain people out there that the only way that you're going to manhandle them is that you're going to have to show aggression with aggression. Just like the president of the NRA, that the only way to defeat a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun. Well, let's make sure that that person that has that gun that's supposed to be a good person, let's make sure that he or she is truly a good person with that gun. Because if you got both people that are bad people, now you got iron sharpening iron, and in reality, all you're going to have is anarchy. America in crisis. So please, let's not let this man's death, Mr. Floyd Rogers' death, be in vain. And let's always remember that there's good and bad, regardless of what side of the coin it may be on. And that's the only thing that I know to do, working as a minister from the Windmill Ministries here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, is to expose my story about the hardships that has happened throughout the life of this ministry, going all the way back to 1983 in a little town called Kenton, Tennessee. This is the only way that I know to clear the air, to settle the dust, and to try to get people to understand, no, I am not the monster in these situations. The monster in these situations was those that was taking advantage of the citizens, because we as a society are supposed to have a constitution that protects all of us towards freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to bear arms. And whenever Homeland Security violated that right in 1989 in Madison County, down in Jackson, Tennessee, in confiscating the sword symbolizing peace on earth from this ministry, they opened up a door of misery. They opened up a door of hostility. They opened up a door of a curse that has now fell upon to this great nation, that instead of us moving forward towards peace and utopia for the past 30 plus years, in actuality, we've been moving backwards in the very wrong direction from peace and utopia. The divorce rate's higher than what it's ever been. All these abortions, all these senseless murders, all these other unjust, corrupt things that's going on, not just in the priesthood pertaining to the Catholicism church, but also throughout the apostolic, as well as the regular churches throughout America. It has been tainted from A to Z, that has put us where we are today in 2020, towards Congress allowing for the president to basically only get a slap on the hand towards what he done to the Ukrainians, to the pandemic, to now the uprising of unrest. Please, let's evaluate each other, but do it in fairness and in truthfulness. If we're going to look at the facts, let's look at the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help us God. Not just parts of the truth, but let's look at the whole truth, because that's what our founding fathers brought to this great nation. And that was how that we was going to rule ourselves, in making sure that everyone stayed within the guardrails of fairness and justfulness. Thanks for listening, and good luck to all of us. And once more, God bless America and shalom.